Good evening. You're watching Left, Right and Centre. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Tonight, Prime Minister Modi moves to Washington today for perhaps the most important leg of his US visit. As he prepares to meet President Obama, is this visit more hype than substance? Can Modi and Obama really restart the India-US relationship? And has this visit been driven more by optics than by actual foreign policy? Well, as we speak, Prime Minister Modi has just concluded a breakfast meeting with top CEOs in New York City. He's going to be making an important policy speech at the Center for Foreign Relations in about a couple of hours from now before he flies to Washington, D.C. for a dinner meeting with President Obama and then formal talks that the two leaders will hold tomorrow. This is the breakfast meeting I was talking about. Mr. Modi, a short while ago there, meeting top American and Indian CEOs. He held a breakfast meeting with 11 of them and then separately held one-on-one meetings with 6 other top CEOs, pushing the India story very hard and promising, very importantly, that the coal scam judgment that the Supreme Court recently gave would give India a chance to start on a fresh slate, on a clean slate. So that is an important statement that he's made to business leaders there. Let's go across to our group editor, Barkha Dutt, who joins us now from New York. Barkha, the CEO's meeting, of course, perhaps begins what many would say is the more substantive part of this visit. We've seen all the color and the dance and everything till yesterday at Madison Square Garden, but in a sense, the visit begins now, doesn't it?
You know, Nidhi, I would say that the showmanship is now over and it's time to talk about what the substance will be. Exactly as you said, the optics have been fantastic for Narendra Modi. There's been a moment of personal vindication for him to receive this kind of reception, peaking, of course, with that large-scale rock star reception at Madison Square Garden. But now it's time to be asked the tough questions, questions on which America and India have not agreed over the last several years. In those meetings with American CEOs, some of the questions that Narendra Modi would have had to confront are over irritants between Washington and Delhi over several issues. There's the nuclear liability issue, which has stood between India and America operationalizing the nuclear deal. There's the issue of retrospective tax, on which India has not moved fast enough for business leaders in Washington. There's the issue of intellectual property rights, where you have giant American pharmaceutical companies opposing the Indian decision to allow Indian companies to create generic drugs. And from the Indian side, there is the issue that even though Narendra Modi announced visas on arrival for Americans after electronic authorization, for Indians who work here, they're asking where's the reciprocity? It's such a nightmare for Indians to get H-1B visas or L visas. The US immigration bill is seen to be antithetical to the interests of Indians who want to work here. So now, Nidhi, it's time to confront these very, very real questions on a trip where I believe geopolitics is less important than economics, where Wall Street is more important than Washington.
And in that backdrop then, Barkha, when you look ahead to his meetings with President Obama, they're going to have a private dinner later tonight, your time, and then formal talks will take place tomorrow. Looking ahead to that, do you get a sense that these two leaders will be able to achieve any kind of breakthrough in terms of taking this relationship forward? Because there's also been a sense that Mr. Obama, for him, India hasn't really been a top priority. Do you think that's changing?
No, I was just saying, Nidhi, that unlike Narendra Modi's relationship, for example, with Shinzo Abe or with Xi Jinping, Narendra Modi is meeting Barack Obama for the first time. And maybe that's why the leaders are meeting twice, tonight for dinner and then tomorrow morning for the actual bilateral. But I do agree with you that there is a perception that President Obama hasn't really shown much dynamism when it comes to the relationship with India. There has been a series of photo ops, whether it was with Manmohan Singh or whether it is now with Narendra Modi. And Narendra Modi, of course, comes with a sense of injured history as well in terms of being denied a visa, something he quipped about at that Madison Square Garden speech. Now, I also think Mr. Modi will be confronted with one complicated and sensitive geopolitical issue. I suspect President Obama will ask India to join the coalition against the Islamic State, the ISIS. How will India respond? We've always taken a position against terrorism, but have always been cautious in getting involved in conflicts that are outside our shores. So that's going to be an interesting and prickly question or tricky question for Mr. Modi to answer if President Obama raises it.
All right, Barkha, thanks very much for joining us. There'll be much more with Barkha there from New York and later on from Washington. That dinner meeting is going to take place at about 4:30 in the morning Indian time. Well, let's go across to our panel tonight. Dr. Sanjay Baru, Director for Geoeconomics and Strategy at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, also the former media advisor to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. He joins us tonight. In fact, Dr. Baru was on that landmark visit that Dr. Manmohan Singh took to the United States in 2005, which led to the civil nuclear deal. Pavan Verma, who joins us tonight in his avatar as a former diplomat rather than as a politician. Nalin Kohli, spokesperson of the BJP, is with us tonight. Sushant Sareen, strategic affairs expert. Sadanand Dhume, resident fellow of the American Enterprise Institute. And we've got Shiv Vishwanathan, well-known sociologist and columnist, here in the studio with us. Dr. Sanjay Baru, to you first. What do you make of the visit so far? Because there's been a sense that it's been very good on optics. It's had a lot of media coverage. Some would say a little over the top. Do you believe that there is real substance, though, at the end of the day to this visit?
Well, the over-the-top part is at home, isn't it, Nidhi? Not elsewhere. I mean, we are always over the top when it comes to these kinds of things. So I would discount that. But I don't agree with the view that it's only showmanship and not substance. I think on this visit, irrespective of who the Prime Minister was, showmanship was part of the substance. I think the first big challenge for an Indian Prime Minister today is to restore the India story, the India brand in the United States. You know, there was an acceleration of the India brand from 2000 to 2009. For 9 years, the India story sold well in the US. And after 2010, there was a decline in India's image, and perceptions in the last 3-4 years were particularly negative. And I think altering perceptions, not just among the administration, not just White House and State Department, but in the business community and within the non-resident Indian community, the Indian American community, which is a very important lobby for Indian interests in the United States. So I think altering perceptions was important. So what happened at Madison Square Garden, I think, was part of the substance of the visit. But you're right that the real transactional part of the visit begins today when President Obama meets Prime Minister Modi. And what they're able to do, we'll have to wait and see. I don't think one can arrive at a judgment today. It's another 24 hours or 36 hours before which you can take a judgment call on the
I just want to follow up on something you said. Was the Madison Square Garden event really an attempt to change, perceptions among the Indian American community? Because this seemed to be an audience that was already very won over by him. I mean, he was in a sense, preaching to the converted. This seemed to be more a celebration of his victory and the fact that he was, in the United States, back in the United States after the visa denial.
Yes, but what is the message? Nidhi, what is the message? There is no other democratically elected leader in the world who will get a crowd like that, who will get an endorsement like that in the United States. I think the fact that this is an umbilical cord, the relationship between India and the United States over the last 2-3 decades has actually been built by this Indian American community. We use the Indian American community through the 90s, through the early part of the 20th century. The Indian American community was very alienated from India before 91. Many people have written books on this. Many of us have seen this relationship evolve. I think there's a turnaround in that relationship, and Madison Square Garden symbolized that. And you can't simply dismiss it away by saying that this is the kind of already converted. I think many of them could be very critical of India if Mr. Modi doesn't deliver on his promises.
Okay, I'll take that to Pavan Verma tonight. Pavan Verma, do you agree with Sanjay Baru there? That, as he said right at the beginning, in this trip, showmanship was part of the substance, and Madison Square Garden shouldn't be dismissed as a sideshow. It was a very important part of changing the views of the Indian American community about India. Pavan Verma.
Nidhi, if there are over 3 million people of Indian origin in America who are all doing well, and if we establish good bridges for them and each of them become a spokesman and ambassador of our country, I think it's a plus point. But I disagree with Sanjay. He said that the media went over the top. I think he went over the top slightly. because this community constitutes 1% of the population of America, and for all their influence and goodwill, even in the days when he said that the American-Indian relationship was on an ascent, they were not in a position to prevent the abject and overt humiliation of our
Not
diplomat.
factually correct.
They were not in a position
That's
to
not factually
prevent.
correct. I can throw numbers. Sorry, Pawan.
Let me finish. Sanjay, I didn't interrupt you.
It's not factually correct.
I'll let Sanjay
I
Baru
didn't
respond in
interrupt
a
you,
moment.
so have patience.
Mr. Verma, you finish your point. I'll let Sanjay Baru respond.
Yeah, let me finish. They could not prevent the snooping. They haven't been able to greatly influence American policy towards Pakistan, which often has acted in a manner of strengthening Pakistan and the rogue elements within Pakistan, in which I count the army in its war against India. Of course, America is a very important partner for us. And of course, in this relationship, all those who can help in strengthening our point of view and our lobbying position are important. And in that sense, the Madison Garden show was a great show indeed. But I was also amazed, Nidhi, and this last 10 seconds for me. Mr. Modi made the best of it. But I was also amazed at the simplification that he made of such complex matters as Mahatma Gandhi's legacy. At one point he said that Gandhiji stood for freedom and cleanliness, as if it was nothing else. Gandhiji stood for religious and social harmony. Gandhiji stood for inclusive growth. Gandhiji stood for progress coming down to the poorest of the poor. But that does not matter. I think he made a good speech, he made a good connect. He's abroad, we wish him well. Abroad, he's the Prime Minister of the country and he represents the country as a whole.
Okay, Sanjay Baru, quick response and then I'll open this up to the panel.
No, I just wanted to say that there's enough now research and data to show how the Indian American community played a constructive role from 91 to 2009. Pawan is right in saying in the last few years there's been an adverse turnaround, but it's only in the last few years. And you know, you don't have time on this show, but there's a lot of published material in terms of the votes in the US Congress on India specific issues, on Pakistan related issues, on the civil nuclear deal, on the 123 agreement. The role that the Indian American community played was a very positive role. And I don't think we can underestimate their relevance to the bilateral relationship.
Let me get Shiv Vishwanathan into this, because you, Shiv Vishwanathan, wrote an interesting column the other day. You were very critical, of the media's coverage of the visit so far, because you seem to suggest that, there is really no focus on substance. And you seem to suggest that much of the coverage is also very frivolous. And you said if the visit was a shopping list, so far the bag is empty. Why do you say that?
First, let's look at the way the discourse takes place. Sanjay Baru talks of advertising as if it's about foreign policy as if it's an act of advertising. Baru might be good on foreign policy. I think he's lousy on brands. Brands demand a different kind of intelligence, nuance and loyalty. So if you're looking at it as the branding of Modi, I still think it's superficial. Any advertising guy will tell you that either foreign policy has become simplified or advertising has been ignored. This is poor advertising. Modi might be a rock star, but he hardly rocked that day. A collection of cliches can never constitute a brand.
You're talking about Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
Why do you call it a collection of cliches?
Name one original thing you did.
Who's
apart
talking
from
about
acting.
Modi? I mean, Shiv Vishwanathan, you also have a lousy concept of what I'm saying. What a stupid
I hope so.
No, but when you say cliches,
I didn't say Modi is the brand.
On.
I didn't say, why don't you listen to what I'm saying?
No, let me finish my argument and then maybe you can first listen to what I have finished saying.
Finish.
Yeah. I think let's be clear about one thing. If you're going to argue advertising and brand, then let's look at the complexity of brand. If you want to talk strategy, then stick to strategy. But if you confuse the metaphors, then you're suspect.
No, but what, brand Modi to whom? Because as far as brand Modi to the Indian diaspora is concerned and to Indians,
that's a cult
that's
following.
sold.
No, there's a cult following. Cult followings tend to be a bit problematic. As he himself said, what you're creating is an umbilical cord. It's time to grow up.
Okay, pretty strong words there. Nalin Kohli, as you, I don't know what you're reading, a Twitter feed maybe already.
No, I'm not reading a Twitter feed. I was trying to take out the article I wrote on the visit on NDTV.com. Actually, that's what I was doing.
So I'm coming to you on that and Shiv Vishwanathan's criticism of this, that, has this turned into a one big show?
I won't react to anyone. Let me just say what I feel. And I think that'll be there. The truth always has many aspects to it, not just one. So let's look at the entire visit. We are looking at events and trying to analyze everything based on single events. I'd look at it as follows. One, if you look at it, there is the UNGA address, there is a series of business interactions, there is Madison Square, there's Central Park, Madison, these are public events. Okay, they are part of the 35 events that are there, and now it shifts to Washington. The first part is arrival and speaking to the global audience for the first time. And I think he makes a substantive speech. People may or may not like aspects of what he says. He's speaking about definitely a model that is a little different. Can we have energy not consumed is the best clean energy? So he's talking about health, he's talking about environment, making a point on terrorism, lots of substantive stuff there, which is to a global audience through the UNGA. If you look at all the business meetings, including today with the CEOs, if I may say, if he says the force is back, or may the force be with you from Star Wars, he's also almost like saying return of the India story, which is what Mr. Baru is speaking about. That essentially this is now getting back to tell people internationally, where credibility is low about the India business story, that no, things have changed, we are moving. Today he refers to the coal gate and says, I want to use it as an opportunity to move on. If I look at the Indian community, sure, there is of course that political aspect of a public event. You're reaching out to a core constituency or people who have an umbilical cord to India, but may not necessarily be voters. But let's not forget, the Indian American community also played an important part when India went through the international sanctions in 97-98. When the India bonds had come out, a lot of them were subscribed by this international Indian community. So while they may not be the big ticket investors per se, a lot of them are in the big ticket investing companies at senior positions and can add to the credibility of the India story when they personally believe in it. Now let's move to the last part. So therefore the first part is about economic diplomacy in a sense, and economics because that's what is driving a lot of it. The second part is geopolitics and geopolitical economics,
which comes now in the Washington part. But Sushant Sareen, it's interesting. There were some commentators who've written today, and I quote an article, for instance, on First Post on the website, which was very critical of what he gave to the Indian American community in terms of visas and the PIO card. It seemed to suggest that Mr. Modi was willing to do a lot for the Indian American community, but wasn't able to extract enough in return. How do you see it?
I don't think you should see it in this kind of a very transactional kind of a thing. I think what he has addressed is a source of harassment for the Indian American community. But other than that, I would go along with what Sanjay Baru and Mr. Kohli are saying. Look, people who are going to be Modi's detractors will remain his detractors no matter what he does. So I don't even take them very seriously anymore. The point is that you had to, the confidence of Indians in India was shaken over the last 4-5 years, and the confidence of foreigners in India was also shaken up. I think what he has managed to do, he's managed to restart the India story. Of course, this is only half the job done. There is the other more difficult half of actually, bringing in the administrative, the economic, and other political reforms in India so that this story actually takes off. That will be the tough part, and we need to see how that plays out. Otherwise, as far as the Indian American community is concerned, I think next to the Jewish community, the Indian American community is probably the most powerful. To compare the Indian American community today, when you have so many CEOs, you have guys who are working in the US administration in the top positions, with what it was 20 years back, I don't think is entirely fair. Today, the Indian American community in America has become extremely powerful, vocal, and well organized, which it probably wasn't in the 90s or even earlier. So, and as far as snooping is concerned, for God's sake, the Americans snoop even over Israel. They snoop over the Germans. Why will they not snoop over us? It is our job to protect ourselves from any kind of untoward snooping. Well, so Indians have a habit of carping too much, complaining
also
too much.
snoop on them.
We need to step up to the plate and we need to clean up our act. Just one more point I'll make.
Yeah.
You know, it might sound very banal to people that Mr. Modi keeps talking about toilets and not about other things. But let me tell you one thing, the biggest source of pushing people into poverty is bad health. And the biggest source of bad health is the lack of sanitation and cleanliness. So he is addressing a very basic economic issue, a health issue, a
I don't think
social
anyone
issue.
falls.
And I think we all
don't
need
think
to
anyone
better
I want to
falls
just
in
come
for
in
that.
here, please.
Yeah. Pavan Verma, quickly, then come to Sadanand. Yes.
No, just to say that, one of the things I raised was this remarkable proclivity of simplifying complex matters and to reduce everything now, as Mr. Sareen is doing, to a demand for shauchalays. I mean, they are very important. But for God's sake, remember one of the great verities Indira Gandhi announced, that poverty pollutes. And remember, the India story starts when India's story starts in India. When we make the necessary economic reforms and changes here, carry them forward to the second generation, have religious peace and harmony in our own society, and not divide this country into bigots and along religion, that's when the India story decides. Not in terms of optics in America. Mr. Modi is doing a good job, I'm happy. But don't get carried away, for God's sake.
You think people are getting carried away?
I suggest you also don't get carried away on the other side.
No, why do you say carried away, Pavan Verma? In what sense? That are we making too much of the outcomes of this visit? It is, after all, his first visit as Prime Minister.
I was the first, Nidhi, not only on this channel, but on other channels to say that when a Prime Minister is abroad, we are not there to talk about what is necessarily a domestic issue. But when I hear assessments which seem to show this visit as having completely changed the India story in America, I believe we are going really overboard. There are a great many things to be done in our country. There are a great many things to be actually negotiated with America. An eloquent speech in the UNGA is not changing the world order. China remains where it is on the permanent 5. India does not. There is a great... When we talk of talking to businessmen, we are talking about issues which are important to us, not only to them, including transfer of technology, both in defense and in the private sector. We are talking of which subsidies we need and which we don't.
You're saying
we are talking of the respect for some of our own laws and not free market fundamentalist reform at any cost.
Nalin had a quick rebuttal. I have to come to Sadanand.
I know.
Patiently
I understand.
Waiting. So,
I just want to make a point
response,
that essentially the script is changing and the language of the past is not going to go. The idiom is not going to work. Mr. Modi's focus is elimination of poverty, not poverty alleviation. See, that's a big difference. So fundamentally, when you're looking at how you're changing things, you can't. Now, you can go back and pick up all the dialogue, stuff we've said 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It may not have a place now. This is action driven. You have no time. You're in a world that wants quick results. And therefore, when you're addressing the business community, saying, okay, visa is over, it's a job done. It's not about just saying, I'm appealing to you. It's a job done. I put in place before I came here is a job done. I launched Made in India before I came here, Make in India, to tell you I'm serious, a job done. So it's like a checklist. You have to move on, move.
Okay.
That's the difference.
Sadanand Dhume, then on this point of whether there is an over-the-top reaction here to this visit, can you tell us how this visit has been covered in the media there? From what I have seen so far, the mainstream newspapers haven't given it a lot of space until today, until actually the Madison Square Garden address. What can you tell us about the feedback there in the press?
That'll be interesting.
Well, first of all, it's been covered much more than Manmohan Singh's visit was last year. And I have to say that I've been listening very patiently to this discussion with a certain amount of bemusement. The people I talk to, both in New York and in Washington, whether in the corporate sector or in the government or in Congress, are enthused, are excited. And I think that Dr. Baru's point was absolutely spot on. What this visit has done is effectively press the reset button on the India story. There was a great degree of disillusionment with India, both in government circles and, more importantly, with the private sector and in business. Now people are standing up and are sitting up and saying, well, let's take another look. And I think that is the achievement. That's what this is meant to be. Does this mean that all problems go away immediately? Of course not. I mean, that would be sort of, you can't expect anybody to achieve that. But has this been a strong start that has once again re-established interest in India? I'd have to say undoubtedly yes. And I think that is something to be proud of. And I think that you shouldn't necessarily get this sucked into the sort of, normal domestic thing about, well, Modi this and Modi that. And if you step back and just look at it as a foreign policy achievement for India, I think it's perfectly fair to say that this has been successful so far.